can relax. This is a different thing.
Welcome, John. It's so good to be with you again.
Oh, my friend, I've missed you, and it's so good to be talking to you. I mean, of course, you must know that you've been on my thoughts a lot, and you've been on my lips, right, a lot as around the launch and in the content of After Socrates.
Right. Well, those
so
those are some wild thoughts to be writing to be on for me. They're awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, whoa, my chair just went kind of crazy here. Hang on one second. Let me pause this. You resume. Sorry about that. My chair just lost a leg on me.
So I hope you got a leg up. Good.
Yeah. So we are, we're talking in a pretty rich time of your life, wouldn't you say?
Yes, that's one adjective that would apply, I guess. Yeah, very rich right now. I mean, I'm not going to complain about anything. I'm loving the work, both the professional academic work and the public work. I've got great relationships. My relationship with my partner is just, because what's happening could be putting a strain on it. But I'm really fortunate to be with a partner who, she and we talk deeply and responsively, and so our relationship is just growing through all of this, and she's been tremendously helpful and supportive.
Yeah.
I mean, she says something which is, I think I totally agree with, is we bring out the best in each other, and that's the hallmark of a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And so there's been that. So I'm just, and I've got just godsends, people coming to help and join the Vervaeke Foundation, and just tremendous talent, and the people who did the filming, Chris and Casey Eldorf, just tremendous talent, and their attitude isn't just, they're professional in the right sense of the word, but their attitude is not just professional. They are personally deeply invested in the work and the project, and I just, and the people that are coming on board, like Robert Gray and Chris, of course, is Christopher Master Pietro. It's just, and Taylor Barrett. I just can't,
it's meaningful.
It's all good. It's just a lot. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
To say the least. A surplus of meaning, an overflowing of it.
Right now, and I remember I hope nobody takes these comparisons the wrong way, but the Beatles said, they were really appreciative that there were 4 of them because they didn't know how Elvis did it. And I just have, what I'm saying is, I have a whole bunch of people, you included, and I have a whole bunch of people that are there, and it's been really helping. I hope keeping me sort of centered and grounded, but also supported, and then the response to a lot of the work, the response to, the talk I did about Neoplatonism at Ralston is just, and then, the response to the talk I did with Jordan, and then the talk I did with Johannes, right? And then I'm just so grateful for the response to After Socrates. It has been amazing. And so I'm just really grateful. I feel supported. There's a tremendous amount of demand, but I also feel a strong sense of responsibility, to really living up to, as much as I can, people's appropriate expectations of me. So that's all on me right now. But like I say, not on me in an unsupported atomic fashion. I've just got so many people, and again, I'm appreciative for close friends like you and Chris and my partner, and she's just astonishing. So
you have
I hope I can stay on this course.
Your partner is a stunning being. To having now, she is uniquely wonderful.
I think so too. Thank you for saying that.
And I can feel your relationship Like I could feel the tenor or the texture of your relationship. It's like it's almost like it feels, there's a sense of I say this more symbolically, but there's a sense of perfection, right? About the
Yeah,
space that is held open for you there.
and I owe so much of that to her.
Yeah.
She's yeah. I mean, and we're coming up, it'll be close to 8 years, so this is not the language of infatuation. We've gone through some really stressful stuff, COVID and things together.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
So
that's where I'm at. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing really great. Like, I mean, the biggest thing in my world is my son, who's
Of course
17 months and is already like counting up to 30 and like says the alphabet forwards and backwards, and he's a trip.
Yeah.
And there's something about paying attention to him and attending to him, and then watching everything from down to the way that he moves, right? Inhabits space, the way that somehow letters, words, and numbers are like, there's an erotic relationship that he has with them. Like,
that is so cool.
Yeah,
maybe he's a prodigy.
Really cool.
Maybe he's a prodigy. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. So he's doing all that at like 17 months, which I gather is pretty early. So,
yeah, it is.
But just in terms of, like my own work and all the stuff that we're looking at, we think about and practice, and there's something observing him and being with him. Like, I'm just feel like all of that throughout that I've gathered through my whole life is informing the frame, right? That I get to participate, right, with him and see him. And it's just, human beings can be remarkable in their in what's possible for us, and how much, and also just reaffirming how much that is banking on relations, right? And because so much of the work that we're doing is about fundamentally dialogue, right? And dialectic, and the back and forth, and the intimacy and the relationship is where I think you kind of feel it's like where I get the sense it's where you feel the visceralness of the meaning, right? Coursing through you when those relationships are rightly situated, right?
Well, we have a new workshop coming up, right?
Yep, totally. Yeah. In fact, all the people who are watching after Socrates, I mean, essentially our course, Circling into Dialogos, is a 2-day process of essentially being experientially introduced to basically the ecology of practices that you are expounding upon in the series.
Yeah, a core part of it. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Yes, very much. And so it's February the what?
4th and 5th. Yeah, so it's February 4th and 5th. Christopher, myself, and you are the main teachers. It's put on by the Circling Institute. It's hosted. Everything's online. We go through mindfulness, philosophical contemplation, circling, the inner subjective work, into dialectic, into Dialogos, which is the Socratic midwifery practice that we'll be doing. It's all it's right. It's very little of it is, there's no lecturing. It's mostly getting you set up to be able to do the practice, and the practice is what do all the work, and the layering of the practices do all the work. And it's remarkable, the people who are drawn to this. I mean, they're just so cool. Like, they're just so cool, right? A kind of emotion, like this sweet spot between, because oftentimes people have a tendency to either be really, really in their head, or to be really kind of emotional or passionate. But this seems to draw in people that have both of those dimensions are really, really open.
Yeah, it's a third way. It's a third
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And it's a really important third way. I'm looking forward to it. It should be great. I always do. Um, I mean, um, after Socrates benefited a lot from the workshops. And then, of course, many of you don't know this yet, but Guy is with me in episodes, and with Chris and Taylor Barrett in episodes 10,
Yeah.
A and B, in which we demonstrate a lot of this also within the series.
Yeah.
The advantage, of course, of coming to the workshop is, unlike the series, we'll be there with you live, and we will be able to answer your questions, address issues and concerns. You will get to hear how other students are interacting with the material, etc. So I think what we do in After Socrates is important. I'm not going to diminish it, but I think there's extra secret sauce that comes out when you can actually go to the workshop.
Yeah. Yeah. And the real practice of this. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. One of the things I appreciated about I was listening to I think the third one earlier this morning, again, and it's interesting. So having known you, right, and worked pretty closely with you over the last 3 years. Has it been 3 years?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Really, eh? Yes.
Doesn't seem 3 years, but it's been 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And just and just being with you and your, like, as you refer to it, participatory observation, right?
Yeah.
And all the practices that you've been diving into and exploring, and the traveling that you've done, and all the conversations that I've seen you have with multiple people, and the books that you've read, and your immersion in this has been truly an immersion in this. And having known you through all of that, I can see all of those components living out in the series, like all of that,
thank
right?
you for saying that.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you, my friend. That touches me. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I'm torn about, I aspire to that. I want to exemplify it, but
Right.
you don't know. Other people have to say that. I can't make that judgment.
Totally.
Right. But so thank you for saying that, because that's what I aspired to. I wanted everything that I did to vector into the series.
Yeah.
All of that that you've referred to, and just somehow find a living presence in the series. And that's what I strove for. And that's what the crew was helping me to realize, and what you helped me realize. And you're coming back. We still have some more filming to do.
Yeah. I'll be flying into Toronto in 3-4 weeks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you're going to be probably a couple of episodes on the emerging communities, and you're going to be with Chris and I around the Martin Buber episode too, I think.
Yes.
So that's fantastic.
That's perfect. Buber, yes. I'd have to just say, just having like being really aware of all the things that you've been engaged in, and all the conversations that we've had, and the internal and external shifts that work has afforded you. It's interesting. It's really watching that. I can see all of those layers. I can see all those shifts in you. I can see you having it's like you're speaking into a listening that you've really earned, right? Like you're really attuned into having been the kind of creature you are, which is just talking and being open to talk to so many people, and really listening to them, right? And really wanting to know what they're up to, and digesting it, and being willing to kind of go in and experience it, right? That aspect of you has really come out in this series, because I get this sense that there's the place from which you're speaking is directly to a listening that is very clear to you. And so your speech, right, and your cadence, right, and your movements, I can just feel what I've experienced of your 3 years, but also throughout your whole life. I can feel your awareness of the depth of who you're speaking to, because you've taken the time to get to know that. And I think it really comes through in a big way.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
I hope that only grows, because that's the path that I found to making this work as authentically accessible to other people, as best I can.
Yeah, it totally comes through. And also just the multi levels and angles that you're coming at it with, right? Like it's
well,
very,
I mean,
yeah, you are inviting a real, like the participant sense of participatory knowing is like throughout all of that, right? And it's a continual invitation into participation. And even in some of the sense, in the ways that, like in some of the ways that you're going over, like really intense, like abstract ideas, but there's a kind of a way that you're landing it into, no, this is the most relevant or deeply relevant thing to right now, being here in a body participating, right? All of that is really just, it's just come through in a congruent way, and all the multi like media that you're using and the different angles, but also just in the way that you're lecturing, right? It's really existentially confronting in the best sense, you know?
I was hoping, and aspiring that my lecturing style would be different than Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Yeah.
You can't do this tradition, especially when you get into the Neoplatonic aspects, without getting into some pretty abstract ideas.
Yeah.
But I always kept tethering it to the project of, well, two related projects. The core project is the reverse engineering of dialectic into Dialogos.
Yeah.
And that keeps grounding everything.
Yeah.
And then the project of, can we set that within, a psycho-ontology that properly homes it. And so, an integration of an understanding of psychology, how the mind works, and both, the cognitive aspects and the dynamic aspects, and your ontology, your study of the structure of being. And can we properly integrate those so that we can properly home dialectic into Dialogos? And then, of course, I've been building around that. The talk I gave at Ralston was about, how this framework might look and how we could make it, intellectually legitimate. And so, I think that grounding back into those more specific transformative projects, I think helped a lot.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted the new series to be answering the questions and the criticisms. I don't mean specific, like about this or that, but the overall, what do I do now that I've watched Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, right? And so, rather than an extensive argument, I wanted an intensive argument that takes people like, well, this is what you do. This is what you do. And really try to address that, and try to show that this is not something I can even demonstrate individually, because the doing is necessarily dialogical and involved with other people. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying is, like, just even in just in the way that you're performing your words in it when you're lecturing, has that invitation to those multi-dimensional ways of participating with it and practicing it. It's an urging to come into practice again and again and again and again and again, right? And so
go ahead.
Yeah. It's just
part of that was. Go ahead.
No, that's it.
Well, part of it was, design, pedagogical design, but a lot of it was also the tremendous interactive support I got from Chris Altorf, who's, the sort of the director and the videographer, and sound person, and then Casey Altorf, who is his brother. But Casey was especially helpful, because Casey would talk to me after each episode, and he was sort of like a stand-in audience for me. And he's a terrifically insightful and sensitive guy. And then the feedback he was giving me and the questions, and it really helped. And so, I'm thanking him. It really helped bring alive a sense of there being people there that I was dialoguing with as I was doing it, and that also helped keep it going that way.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. That comes through. It's interesting. What I'm curious about, just, when you think back to when you would start a lecture on the awakening from the meanings crisis, right?
Mhm.
And like, when I would imagine there's that moment where there's the moment right before you start, and then there's the moment you step in and you start. When you think back to that, and you think back, I'm wondering if there's much difference that you can discern,
Yeah, there is.
right? In like where
There
you
is.
start from, right? And come into the lecture.
Yeah, very different. Very.
Yeah.
And this has nothing to do with comparing the different crews. Alan Keon's crew, the guy who was responsible for Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, fantastic work, and it was all voluntary. And but I went into Awakening from the Meaning Crisis very much with an individualistic orientation, a sense of being alone and trying to sort of wrestle the world into a conversation with me. And at times I get perhaps even a little bit anger would come out, and a sense of some of the frustrations I've had around things. And that's been called out. Jordan Cooper called me out about maybe I was a little too harsh on Luther, and we've had a really productive a series of, he did a video, I did a response, and then
Yeah. I thought, right.
yeah, he and I were on Paul's channel.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Paul Vervaeke, for doing that. Um, and the feeling's much different with After Socrates. After Socrates, I feel, if this isn't pretentious, I feel sort of Socrates is there, and the whole tradition is there with me, and then you are there with me, and Chris is there, and Jordan Hall is there, like Jordan Hall is there, and so it felt much more. I felt much more. I guess the word I'm looking for is I felt much more accompanied, and I
Yeah.
felt much more like I was trying to enter into a dialogue with people, and I mean, I'm presenting theoretical arguments. I'm still trying to persuade, but in addition to persuading, I thought there was much more in which I was trying to afford, and perhaps help, afford and aid, at least afford and aid people,
Yeah.
than I was doing in Awakening from the Mean Crisis. So it's like a different musical piece. It has a different tenor for me. It feels different, and I don't want to besmirch Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It's like my firstborn child or something like that. But I feel much better in stepping into the persona framework of After Socrates than I was when I was in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Yeah. So it's like I think what I'm hearing you say is it's like that moment where you go from not doing the lecture to that moment of stepping into the lecture. Where you step to go into the lecture is populated, right? And accompanied,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And this is to the good, I think, because Awakening from the Meaning Crisis was very monological, and the whole point of After Socrates is that we need to move from the monological to the dialogical, and the later episodes argue for how profound this dialogical framing is, how psychologically and ontologically profound this dialogical framing is. And so, I mean, as you said, that has been something that has been developing in me, and this was one of the criticisms made by Paul Vanderklay and Jonathan Pajot of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It was individualistic, it was monological, and I've taken that to heart, and then just done some amazing work with Dan Chiappi about the dialogical aspects, and done a lot of great work with you in the dialogical practices, right? The dialogical aspects of reason. And so I'm stepping into a dialogical persona in the positive sense of the word, and framing. And it feels much more supportive and less, I feel less alone. They're not quite the right adjectives, but there's a different sense in After Socrates, and it's a sense that is appropriate to the content of the course. And I'm just happier.
Yeah,
That's
totally. Totally. I really appreciate that. I think what you're saying is like this. There, on one level, you have what you're saying is you have literally more people in your life that you engage in this way and practice
yep.
this with, right? On one level, there's literally more people out there, right? And you see them and have that experience. But I think what I'm hearing, I think what I'm appreciating is that when you step into lecture, right, and you say that first word, um, they're living in you. It's not just quantity of
I
people
hope so.
like that you're around, but there's a way that you feel is it the word kind of a deeper, like a rich, deep sense of belonging? What's the how would you define that, like, or describe the tenor of that connection with the people that you carry with you through this?
It's belonging, it's accompaniment, it's being in concert rather than giving an isolated aria, right? It's that sense of resonating with other people as I'm doing the work. And and like I said, a lot of you are in my head when I'm doing it. And it's different because when I did Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, most of the people that were in my head were only in my head textually because I had only known them through text. Many of the people that are in my head for After Socrates are real people like you that I've formed real relationships with, and it's a much more vibrant, living kind of presence when I'm giving the lecture. And of course, I'm not just giving the lecture. I'm doing the points of reflection to encourage reflection and dialogue, and then I'm doing the practices, right? And sometimes I'm doing the practices with other people. And so there's just I feel like I'm in fellowship in a way I didn't feel like when I was presenting Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
And there's something so congruent about, in a connecting link with this, John Russin, I've been talking with him quite a bit.
Lucky you. He's an excellent person.
That guy, I love that guy. I love that guy. Amazing. Amazing individual. But in the beginning, I've been going with him and walking through his one of his books, Sites of Exposure. And he I think it's either in the preface or maybe it's the first chapter where he talks about the engagement with philosophy. And he says that if you really engage properly with philosophy, it's analogous to a deep relationship with another human being, right? Whereas as you begin to understand, right, with a human being, if you form a relationship, the process of understanding you is also the process of having lived through understanding you and being changed by that, right? So I know you through my own transformation with you in the relationship.
That's at the core of participatory learning. That's what makes it participatory learning.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. So there's kind of like, I think it's a real, that sense that you had, right, already, right, which is this deep, profound, like grappling with philosophy and these ideas that you've been doing for years and years and years and years. And in some sense, to lift that, right, and carry that very philosophical conversation with people, right, and having ongoing friendships, and the depth of that, right, is like that times 100, it seems to me.
That's well put. John has got at some point we might want to do like we did with Zevi, sort of a
I'll set that up. I'll set up through, and maybe we'll get Chris in it too.
That'd be great.
Yeah, there's some similarities I think between Christopher and John Russin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's well said. I think that's well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd very much like to do that. But back to the point you made, yes. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's part of our joint project, not just you and I, but a lot of these people we're talking about bringing back, philosophia, philosophy as a way of life, right? As an attractive way of life,
yeah,
a beautiful way of life.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not here to disparage academic philosophy, but it doesn't do that very much. It has its other things it gives, this vision of from Hadot and Heidegger about recapturing philosophy as a way of life, as the fellowship love of wisdom, and we really exemplify that sense of philosophy when we do the workshops, because we do all the and this is one of your great insights, right? You do all the circling stuff and the mindfulness stuff, and that really builds the philia.
Yeah.
And then we do the philosophical fellowship, and we do the dialectic into Dialogos, which turns it towards Sophia. Yes. And we bind the two together, even though we're not talking very much, we're not lecturing about academic philosophy. We do some philosophical texts in the philosophical fellowship, but by and large, that's not how we're doing it. It's this other thing. It's giving people a shareable taste in what it is to love wisdom, to really identify with the cultivation of virtue, things like that. Yes.
In that sense, well, a couple things. As I said before, I really like your recent conversation with Johannes was really, I loved it. Right.
And let's promote that. Let's everybody promote that conversation. I'm going to promote it again. I'm going to promote it again. I mean, it's such a gift to get to talk to him.
Yeah.
And again, what he's doing with Halcyon, that's also exemplary. And he's put his own life, at risk. I don't mean like death, but status and wealth and all the other things, and the integrity there of really philosophy is going to be philosophia. That's what it's going to be.
Yeah,
and he exemplifies that. I mean, I've got to know Johannes, and I love him. I think he's just I admire his integrity and his exemplification of everything we're talking about here, so much.
Absolutely. And there was that part where you guys were walking through Being in Time, and you brought up a point in it where it's kind of like it's like a challenge, and I think a legitimate criticism of Heidegger, right? Which is you're like, well, how do we practice this though? And I think it was in relationship to Heidegger's, right, talking about poetry, and you said, so the poetry is one way that we can get at this, right? What are the other practices in that sense? And it's interesting, because I'm right now in the middle of, I just started last week doing a video series of me reading called The Basic Questions of Philosophy. And
Heidegger.
Yeah. And it's the book. Is
it philosophy or phenomenology?
Of philosophy. Basic Questions of Philosophy. So it's the book that it's the lecture where he actually most clearly takes the turn, right? From this transition from being in time to more of history, ontological history, and all of that stuff. It's the one that's considered that particular book. And it's interesting because this book, as I'm reading it, the whole thing is actually him telling you how to practice, right? So it opens.
Really?
Yeah, it opens. And it's implicit in the very writing. As he says, it opens he opens here. He's like, here's the first paragraph: Basic Questions of Philosophy. that seems to imply there is such a thing as philosophy in itself, for whom the domain basic questions could be drawn out. But such is not the case and cannot be. On the contrary, it is only the very asking of the basic question that first determines what philosophy is.
Right.
Since that is so, here, and here's the thing: you can imagine him saying this right before we break up into a Zoom room and do some practice, right? Like you can just imagine him, right? Since that is so, we need to indicate in advance how philosophy will reveal itself when we question, i.e., if we invest everything without exception, in this questioning and do not merely act as if we were questioning while still believing we possess our reputed truths.
Mm.
Right? You can kind of get this sense of like this kind of confrontation, right? This how to listen, how to read, right? And so there, and in some sense, I think in some way he's like writing this as a practice, right? In some way.
I like that idea about philosophy emerging from the questioning. When we talk about this at the workshop, right? Yeah. That is, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Because it's not like, what he's saying is like, what I hear him saying is philosophy isn't out there somewhere that we then ask questions about. It's only when the question of philosophy is asked, right, that philosophy begins to show itself and come into being, right?
Is
and
it
of
even
course,
the question? Is it the question of philosophy, or is it even philosophical questioning? Like what I mean is, is Heidegger saying even before we bring up the topic of philosophy? Because I'm thinking of the pre-Socratics. As soon as we are engaging in a certain kind of questioning, then therein is where philosophy emerges. That's what I'm hearing him say.
That's the way I hear it too. Like it's primordial, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's profoundly right. It's interesting. He's sort of saying here, to use some of our language, right? There's a co-emergence of philosophy in this sense, and the logos catching fire.
Yes.
In the questioning, in the dialoguing. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And then he goes on and here's this thing. He starts talking about the way he's using the word disposition, the disposition, right? One has, and he says, like, it's a couple paragraphs down. If we had to say something immediately about the basic disposition of philosophy, i.e., of future philosophy, we might call it restraint. And now, like, listen to these two things. What he calls restraint. He says, in it are two elements originally belong together and are as one. First one being terror in the face of what is closest and most obtrusive, namely that beings are, and awe in the face of what is remotest, namely that in beings and before each being holds sway. Restraint is the disposition in which this terror is not overcome and set aside, but is precisely preserved and conserved through awe. Right?
Right. And so this will also, like, where is this in the order of his work? Because later, I mean, this sounds like what's going to later come out as Gelesenheit.
Yeah, this is before. I think this is before that. Yeah,
right.
I think this is like 37. I think is when he wrote this. Yeah,
the awe and terror. That's really, so it's there's a numinous quality to I wonder if he's read Otto, but the fascinating terror, right, around the mystery.
Right.
So so there's a numinous, right? There's a numinous quality. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In this
That
thing,
sense.
in this way that like, and this is what struck me about this is I'm like, oh, because when I think about, in our course circling into Dialogos, in some way all the practices, right, is strikes me as cultivating this disposition, right?
Yes.
In other words, the terror part being like recognizing like that the thing most determinate of you and closest into yourself is also the most mysterious, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
the awe, right, being that sense of getting how being holds sway over everything, but it's not one of the beings, and the mystery of that. And so this disposition somehow comes together. And what I hear in the word, tell me what you hear in the word disposition, but disposition is something like it's got a deep sense of participation in it, right?
Yeah, because it's a structuring of your being rather
Yeah.
than an act. So you inhabit it, habit, right? I guess what I would add then, I mean, is right. We take the disposition, and this is he's of course familiar with Aristotle. He's deeply influenced by Aristotle, although he doesn't say it very much. But the disposition, what we're doing is we're disclosing the disposition, but we're also trying to practice it into the beginnings of habit and orient it towards a particular virtue, which is the virtue of reverence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been talking about, it's relevance realization into resonance realization into reverence realization.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, and that's again where I get a little bit critical of Heidegger, because there's not enough discussion about how the dispositional becomes the virtuous.
Yeah.
And that's precisely where the issue around practice that
Yeah.
Johannes and I were wrestling with it. I think that's the pivot point. Is I don't want just dispositions.
Yeah.
I want virtues that demonstrate virtuosity towards the good.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's right, but that would be my criticism,
Yeah.
my critical response. Yeah, I get. I want reverence, which is the proper virtue in the face of the numinous. Right?
Totally. Yeah.
And
Totally.
there's and this I like take what I'm going to say with a very big grain of salt, and it's very preliminary. So,
Mhm.
but we're starting to run some experiments I'm doing with my colleagues at U of T, and does awe directly create cognitive flexibility? We're not getting positive results around this.
Hmm.
Right. And it might be that and I'm not saying all of the traditions are false about how awe transforms people or anything like that. I think there's an intervening thing, which is the proper reflective appropriation of the awe experience into the initial and ongoing cultivation of the virtue of reverence. I think that is where the transformation actually lies. I don't think the power of transformation is in the awe experience itself. I think it's a necessary initiation, but it is not sufficient unto itself to bring about the transformations.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it kind of like I get the sense of what you're talking about? The awe is like just the opening, right?
Yes.
The initial opening, right? In Heidegger's language, the ecstatic time kind of opening up, right?
Yeah.
But then the the virtue of reverence is this: once you're open, and before the numinous would be how does that translate, right, into the way I think, I feel, I sense, I behave,
Exactly.
right?
Right. So the issue is, what's the appropriation
Yeah.
of the experience, so that just like how good ritual works,
Yeah.
what happens such that that gets taken up and transfers broadly and deeply through my life, and deeply and dynamically through my psyche.
Yeah.
That I think, because to my mind, this is deeply analogous to taking mushrooms at a rave versus taking mushrooms within where you have the proper setting and sacred context.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And I've had both experiences that raped, but purely like by the whim of some grace on that behalf. Yeah, exactly. So it's like this sense of, it's like I'm imagining like if you imagine someone's like an island, and the center of the island is the oldest, it's the most solid, and as you come out towards the shore, it becomes less organized, right, less orderly, and then when you hit right up to the shore is where all like the artists and the poets and the people that have this love affair with the unknown. So awe would be something like that initial opening to what's beyond the island, but the transformation and the flexibility would come through the way that if you look at it like a culture, like yourself is like a culture, the way that the culture takes in this and updates all of its structures.
Well, let's play with the analogy. I think awe takes you to the shore, and that's where Newton says he was at one point in one of his things. I think reverence builds you a virtuous vessel so you can set sail. And there's a difference.
Yeah, that is a difference. Very nice.
Yeah, and then I think about the lee shore from Moby Dick. Do you know the passage? It's one of my favorites.
No.
Here. So a good friend of both you and I, Christopher Massapietro, gave me this because we both love Moby Dick.
Oh, great.
And when you open the card.
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
Okay, so here's the quote. But as in landlessness alone resides the highest truth, shoreless, indefinite as God, so better it is to perish in that howling infinite than be ingloriously dashed upon the lee, even if that were safety. For worm-like then, oh, who would crave and crawl to land? Terrors of the terrible, is all this agony so vain? Take heart, O Balkington, that's a character who's being referred to. Bear thee grimly, demigod, up from the spray of thy ocean perishing, straight up leaps thy apotheosis.
Could you one more time through? One more. Can you do that one more time through?
Let me set the context for it now.
Yeah.
Melville's telling the story, the image of a ship, and it's the lee shore, right? There's a terrific storm coming in, and what the ship is tempted to do is return to harbor. But if it turns that way, it will actually be driven by the storm and crashed upon the shore. So what it has to do is it has to actually turn and go out, right, into the heart of the storm and into the open ocean. And then he's using that as he's reflecting on this character Balkington, who was going to be a major character in the story, but is a minor character, but just this one part. And he's using that as this metaphor for trying to understand the human relationship to being. Right. So I'll read it again.
Yeah.
But as in landlessness alone resides the highest truth. So the ship has to, shoreless, indefinite as God, and you can think of God like almost like the Apeiron right here. So better it is to perish in that howling infinite than be ingloriously dashed upon the lee shore.
Yeah.
Right. Even if that were safety. For worm-like then, oh, who would crave and crawl to land? Yeah. Terror of the terrible, is all this agony so vain? Take heart, O Balkington. Bear thee grimly, demigod. Up from the spray of thy ocean perishing, straight up leaps thy apotheosis. So, right? And think about, being towards death and accepting our finitude, but nevertheless right? The finite transcendent of Plato. We accept our finitude, but nevertheless we orient towards the infinite horizon, and we have to use the very thing that is trying to destroy us to power our movement into that howling, indefinite, infinite.
Yeah. Yeah. To continue, I love that image of turning toward it.
Yes, and using the wind that is trying to push you to your destruction, even though it looks like you're heading home, to actually sail more deeply into that indefinite, howling infinite.
Mystery.
So you see, there's the terror and the numinous, but there's also, no, I'm going to turn, I'm going to reorient, and I'm going to figure out how to empower my sails, my inspirational, aspirational sails, right? So that I can sail more deeply. That is the virtuous vessel of, right?
Yeah.
Of
And like reverence. Like, yeah, because reverence has this quality of, like it grant, and what's cool about it is it affords you in some sense to reach into the numinous, but that also educates you on your own right size. Right.
That's right. That reverence is the alternative to servitude and arrogance. It frees you from both hubris and tyranny.
Yeah. 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 Because it's like if you actually take that task, right, and you turn towards death, and you said something interesting. You said like turn towards death, and then you said something about the light, even turning towards death, looking at the light beyond the horizon, right?
Yeah.
In the face of death, right? Even though we're going to die, still turning towards what's beyond the horizon, right?
So, up from the spray of thy ocean perishing, up from the spray of thy ocean perishing, straight up, leap thy apotheosis.
And apotheosis, what is apotheosis again?
Well, theosis is becoming godlike. That's the process of becoming more like God.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, because there's that reverence reverence is fascinating to me, right? Because
what are we capable of it?
Right.
That's my question. This is Tarot in Camus' The Plague. I want to know how to be a saint without God. That's the whole problem I'm up against. I sort of identify that. Are we capable of reverence? Are we capable of it?
Right. John, what would you say? What are some of the conditions for its possibility, right, that would afford us being capable of it?
I think a dialogical, participatory realization of our finite transcendence, the tonos, then tonos being held in the Dialogos. I think
finite transcendence.
That's Highland's way of understanding the core of Plato. That what Plato's on about is to continually remind us of the polarity, but also the magnetic attraction between the poles of our finitude and our transcendence. If we just gravitate to our finitude, we become servile and we become subject to despair. If we just gravitate towards our transcendence, we become hubristic and we become we become tempted to crush others because of our glory. And so, if we hold this polarity and the magnetism, but also the distance, then we can most properly be human beings. We can be the God-like mortals.
Seems like this is addressing your question I think you posed to Johannes in your last conversation. I think this addresses it, right? Where you're like, how do we do transcendence without the two worlds mythology?
Yes.
Right?
That's Tarot's problem. Like, how to be a saint without God? How do we do that? But transcendence that doesn't leave behind the finitude, right? This is why an ontology, a theory of the structure of being, in which emergence and emanation are top down, bottom up, completely interpenetrating.
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, I think that you're right that and we do this in the workshop, like we find the virtuosity for the transmutation of the resonance, that sense of vibrant intimacy, into the sense of reverence. People go from the interpersonal intimacy to a sense of awe, but that awe that is appropriated as they get a sense of awe about the virtues, and then that is appropriated now as a call, right, of reverence, a call to cultivate them and participate and identify aspirationally with becoming more virtuous. We are actually trying to do that tuning in the workshop.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I've taken up a practice because of the thing with Johannes, right?
Oh yeah, what is it?
So I call it came out of sort of the inner dialogue work I do with my sort of internal sage. So I call it responsive poesis. So what I'll do is I'll read, I got a book, Islamic mystical poetry. That's poetry from the Sufi tradition, translated, of course. I can't read Arabic or Farsi. But I'll read the poem, and then I will write a poem in response. Not criticizing it, but dialogically, what is being evoked and provoked in me, and is coming out in metaphor and symbol and gesture and timing and rhythm to the poem. I do responsive poesis because, right, what I find is whatever wonder or awe the poem does, my concern is we're tempted to just read that and go, oh, isn't that wonderful? And then put it on a shelf, right? Whereas if we do the responsive poesis, poetry making, then it becomes irreverent. Yes, exactly. So I've been taking this up as a practice and doing it regularly, and I've been thinking about how much it resonates. There's like a triangle forming in my mind. It resonates with Lectio Divina, and it resonates with philosophical fellowship, this practice in a really powerful way.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's something like, it strikes me as like that it's I mean, it's funny. My imagination just imagine like you write the poem back, and then you write the poem back to that poem. Like there's you're in a,
and it has that jazz feel. Like you presence the poem reverberates back through you, and you presence the poem back to it, if I can put it that way. But yet it's changed, it's altered, because it's also your poesis, and so it binds you to the poem in a way that just reading the poem doesn't. It's very much like Lectio, but it's got this added dimension to it. I'm thinking about introducing it towards as a practice towards the end of After Socrates, to add to some of the ecology of practices that we've already done. I've been playing with it very seriously and carefully for a few months now, and I'm going to keep going. But I find it really, really intoxicating as a way.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
I would imagine. I have to say, because this is Daniel. We're doing dialectic into Dialogos every week, and we
thank you for doing that, by the way.
Oh, totally. Oh yeah, it's a privilege. I've gotten so much out of that. But we've switched into doing slow reading of Rilke's Dueno eulogies.
And that's completely appropriate, right? I think, and other people, Alexandra Zachary, she's doing work on what if we did philosophical fellowship around a work of art rather than a philosophical text, right? Yes, very much.
And the idea is like we wanted to go deep into that, right, and just be saturated by it, and then come back into and pick up dialectic and Dialogos again.
I think that's great. I'm so grateful that there's a lot of this excellent participatory experimentation going on around us, and that we can bring it in. Yeah, take up, if you have time, the responsive poesis.
I I'm going to do that. In fact, there's something about, especially with the Dueno eulogies, man. I've been reading the Dueno eulogies since I was in my late teens, and I've read them over and over and over and over and over and over again. They're like right here for me. But doing it right in this way has me like situated in the eulogies in ways where I realize that I realize that the eulogies are there's multi levels in which the meaning is being conveyed, right?
The elegies are amazing for that.
Yeah, it's got this. It starts off with the first two or three. I mean, they're difficult to comprehend because there's so much going on with them, right? But they're comprehensible.
Can you read them into German, or are you reading them in translation?
Yeah, I'm just doing the translation. Mitchell's translation.
That adds to the difficulty. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have Daniel. to
That's great.
Yeah. But what we'll do is we'll do the slow reading of the whole eulogy and read the whole thing 4 or 5 times. And when you do that, right, and you go back and forth and just reading that out loud, man, it really, really invokes. And I just got this sense of like, I think what the eulogies are doing is that it's something like they put you. Rilke, what he's doing is he's basically this narrator. This mysterious of like who he's speaking to and who's speaking, right? Is this mystery.
Yeah.
But I really get this sense that it's like the last moment before you die, right? It's like he's speaking to you in that last moment before you die, right? And it's really stunning. And everything like and then there's a couple of eulogies in the middle that are so obscure, right? Right? And then it like the last quarter of them, it starts to come back a little bit more. The tenor of the words are a lot like a little bit easier to understand and coagulates, right? But it's even performative in that sense, right? Like the rhythm of how obscure it is versus how not obscure it is. Like all of it is this ride, this participatory ride that he's taking you on. It's just stunning.
Yeah. I think the great works are like that. Melville's Moby Dick is like that. You get this really amazing beginning, and all this stuff is just being churned up archetypally, and then you have this long stuff in the middle, and you're getting worn down, just like the sailors. And he talks about it. You're just adrift at sea, and nothing's happening, and your identity is dissolved. You're in the crow's nest, and your identity is dissolving because one day is passing into another, and right, and it's right, and you're just reading the chapters, and you're going, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just disappearing one chapter after another. I like that came together in something. I was just talking with Candida, and so she reached out to me a while ago, and she's based, I believe, in Amsterdam in Europe, and she reached out to me because they had a group and they wanted to do a performance around T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and they didn't want to read the poem. They wanted to use dance, imagery, music, and we paired up, and I became like the creative consultant. For it, and I wrote the essay for the brochure about, what was amazing was it like bringing out the performative aspect of the poem and not giving people the text, but just the relevant sort of headings and the images and this amazing performative dance. And there were people on ropes, so there was a vertical dimension to the dancing, anyways. She said something. It was a huge success. They've been taken up by IPSA as one of the potential 10 theatrical productions that will be brought to North America, and there's a good chance they're gonna be one of them.
No kidding.
And I hope they come to New York, because then I'll go to New York, and I'd like to actually give a talk before or after.
Oh, that's so great.
Right.
That's so great.
But she said this. Thank you. She said this amazing thing. She said, you know, it was really interesting. People who really knew the poem well found the performance powerful, and people who did not know the poem well found the performance powerful. See what had happened? The performance is a bridge from people who know the poem. They can go out beyond it, but people who don't know the poem, they can enter into the depths of it from the performance. And it was just like, oh, so we're going to do it. We're going to, another 2 years, we're going to invest in putting together another one of these. And that's reminding me exactly of this kind of responsive poesis, right? Where, right. And it's just like, and all the work I'm doing around ritual right now. But it's just so, it's like these great works of art, they deserve a ritual response, not just a linguistic or even a conceptual response. And people are ready for this. You know, the poem is a dark poem. I argue it's about the meaning crisis. I mean, and I don't think that's a stretch by any means. And right, and the imagery is dark, and it's all, and you know, it's about the meaning crisis. And you know, there's parts in the poem where people are being overwhelmed by water and all that. The poem is just like, the poem is like, right, and yet people, they expressed a deep appreciation in all three senses of the word for this. See, people are ready. At least some people are ready. Right. To really engage with this kind of stuff.
And like, I'm keeping the word incarnate keeps.
And this is the three things I keep asking about. What's the relationship between embodiment, incarnation, and incorporation? They are all saying the same thing when they're all saying very different things. And what's the relationship between them? And let's try and, first of all, draw out that relationship and then elucidate it, bring it to clarity, articulate it so we can make more sense out of it, right? We need to do this.
Right.
I'm going to be talking with Jordan Wood tomorrow all about, you know, Maximus and his idea about how Maximus has a fundamentally incarnational ontology in
its connection to time and incarnation. Totally. A client I've been working with for a while said something. We kind of had this retrospective conversation, right? It just happened spontaneously. And he said this striking thing, and it's ringing, and it's ringing in right here. And he said this amazing thing. He's like, I feel like I've come into my own skin.
Yes.
Right.
And you know, how doesn't that resonate with what happens in the workshop with people say, I've discovered a kind of intimacy I never knew about, but always longed for. Like they say that those weird paradoxical things. Yes,
totally. This is awesome, John. Unfortunately, I have to bring this to I'm the opening with it is, I'll say.
The way up and the way down are the same way. This has been wonderful. It's been great,
really
my friend. Let me know when this comes up. I'll make sure that everybody on my platforms knows about it. I think this is integral. Thank you for discussing in depth after Socrates. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, John. Much love.
Bye-bye. Much love to you too. Bye-bye.